One sec. And I think that we are live. Yes, we are live. Good. Well, welcome, Cynthia. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Rebecca. I'm with Technovation, and this is Kate, my colleague, also at Technovation. Cynthia, could you introduce yourself to everyone today?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Cynthia Breazeal. I am a professor at MIT. I work in the media lab where I direct the personal robots group. So my areas of expertise are, I'd say, at the intersection of artificial intelligence and machine learning, but we also build a lot of robots, so mechanicals, design, software, and our robots they're social robots, and they're all about interacting with people. And I like to talk about them as being a helpful companion. So it's bringing together kind of the utility and functionality that we all know about technology and AI and all that kind of stuff, but with this very humanistic, human-centered experience where you don't feel like you're interacting with a something, you actually feel like you have a collaborative, empathetic other who happens to be a robot. And we're discovering quite a lot, not only about advancing the algorithmic side of the work, but we're also starting to learn a lot about the human psychology and the impact and the outcomes of this different kind of relationship and experience with this kind of technology. So we straddle arts, design, science, engineering all at once, and to create this new synthesis that we call a social robot. So that's what I do.
That is so cool. I don't think that all the robots that I've interacted with haven't been, they haven't looked like an animal or a person or anything. Like they've been my, vacuum cleaner or whatever. So that would be very cool to interact with one. Do you have one that you could show us so we could see what it
Yeah,
looks like?
so we've designed many different robots in our labs over the years for many different stakeholder groups, from young children and early childhood learning, all the way up to older adults who are trying to age in place, and everywhere in between. So I do have, I have one robot here with me. So this one, I actually did a startup. That was an adventure. Okay, so Jibo, maybe some of you have heard about Jibo. Jibo was the robot that we did, let me unplug it here, that we did as a mass consumer robot. So Jibo is known as the first family robot for the home, where he interacts with the whole family. So if you Google Jibo, you can learn all about him. There was just recently an announcement. So when you do startups, you'll learn about things like acquisitions and stuff like that. So the startup doesn't exist anymore, but Jibo now is being brought to market and developed by a very big company called NTT, with a subsidiary called NTT Disruption. So it's a global company. They want to bring Jibo to many different areas. Hello, Jibo, but particularly education and healthcare. So again, a helpful robot companion. You can see he's not trying to look like a human or a pet. He's anthropomorphic, and he can dance and do all kinds of things. So he's again kind of I'd say a anthropomorphic iconic design, but again very kind of personable. So this is Jibo.
That's so cool. So for anybody who's joining us now, because I know there's sometimes a little bit of a delay to go live, Cynthia Breazeal from MIT just shared with us Jibo. And Cynthia, how do you spell that? J-I-B-O?
It's Jibo. Yeah.
Cool. J-I-B-O. If you want to.
I'm going to put him down here.
That's very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing Jibo with us. So I guess something that we're really interested in learning more about from you, as you've designed so many different kinds of robots, is how how do you think about the people who are using them when you're designing them? Um, when do you think about them, and how do you find out who these people are?
Yeah. So we think about them at every stage of the process. I'd say, so social robotics is a new kind of technology, right? It's kind of getting out there now in a commercial sense. It's been a research area for almost 20 years. There's typically like a 20-year cycle between the fundamental research that happens at a university to the time when you might actually start to see it in the world. So it's like it's literally just about that time, which is why you're starting to see these technologies come out right now. I've been at it for like 20 years, so I'm known to be one of the founders essentially of this whole field of social robotics. So, I'll start with the kind of academic research side, and then we can move into kind of the impact human design side. But it all starts with, I think, curiosity driven science and exploration. And I want to really encourage you to appreciate the importance of just being passionate and excited and curious about something, because a lot of fundamental inventions and insights and discoveries, they stem from just that curiosity and that interest and that passion. And that was very much the case for me. So, when I tell the story looking all the way back, way back in the day, I saw Star Wars when I was 10, and I became fascinated by droids, R2D2, C3PO, because unlike all the kinds of science fiction robots that I had seen before, which are kind of like automaton and just kind of did what they were told, R2D2 and C3PO were these, rich personalities. They formed friendships, not just with each other, but with the people they were trying to help. They would go on adventures. I mean, they were rich, full-fledged characters. So growing up, that was kind of my sense of what a robot should be. It should be like that helpful companion, right? So I was old enough to know robots like that didn't exist. I was old enough to think they may never exist in my lifetime, but just through a series of, my education and opportunities, I ended up at MIT as a graduate student. And again, this is like a long time ago. I won't tell you how long ago. But this was the beginning now of this field that's called autonomous robots. So before, robots were teleoperated, or they were just kind of like machines that just did their thing. They weren't perceiving the world on their own. They weren't making their own decisions. They weren't learning on their own. They weren't like those droids, they're more like machines, that could do things, or be operated. So the lab I joined was famous for kind of being a pioneer of the field of autonomous robots. So that's where I got started. And I started, I remember walking into this lab, and at the time, this was also at MIT, what was then called the Artificial Intelligence Lab. And the robots were all inspired by biology. So not just kind of like symbolic kind of computer science notions of intelligence, but natural forms of intelligence, where there was kind of this implicit frustration. And again, this was a long time ago, of where you could build these robots that had huge computers, and like they were trying to get them to say go from point A to point B and navigate around obstacles. And it took so much computation and so long that literally in the videos you see shadows moving. They had to speed it up. So my advisor was a man called Rod Brooks, who again extremely famous in the area of AI. He basically was like, why is it that a fly can do all of these things that it takes literally hours and hours for our robots and our kind of traditional ways of computing to do the same kind of thing? So he said there must be something about biology and how that kind of intelligence is organized that is giving this other kind of behavior. So my background has always been this deeply biologically inspired sense of natural behavior. So when I came into this lab, all the robots were inspired by insects, literally insects, because it's kind of like that's what the compute could handle, But I remember walking into that lab. This is like, I was recently admitted. I'm trying to decide which graduate school I want to go to. And I saw all of these simple autonomous robots scurrying around. And it was like that Star Wars moment came over me all over again. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, if we're ever going to see robots like that, it's probably going to start in a lab exactly like this, or maybe even this lab. So I knew I had to go there. So again, that passion, that curiosity, that's kind of always guided me. And it was a number of years. So I started with insect-like inspired models of intelligence. And, there was a time when we started to think about, what's, beyond. So a lot of the time autonomy was being valued in terms of the ability to do dangerous, dull, whatever tasks that keep people safe. So autonomy was like, you could send a robot into the ocean and do scientific exploration, or into volcanoes, or even into to Mars, And there was this moment when I was a graduate student when literally NASA landed Sojourner and Pathfinder on Mars, that I thought, oh my God, it's like huge success for this entire field of robotics. We are sending robots into all these crazy places, even Mars. Oh my God, even Mars. I'm like, but why aren't they in our homes? When I was growing up, I thought they would be among us, among people, not far from us, but with us as partners. And I literally walked into my poor advisor's office. And I will tell you, I was fairly far down my path to my PhD. And I said, I have to stop and change everything. I need to build robots that interact with people, where they need to have like social and emotional intelligence. And that's what I need to do. And he let me do it. So that became the beginning of this whole field of social robotics, which is an entirely different conceptualization of what intelligent means. It wasn't just about navigating and making decisions about interacting with things in the environment. It was about interacting with people and deeply understanding the human experience and how people think and behave. Nobody in AI was really thinking about that, right? So it was a completely different lens on what intelligence was. And of course, if you understand anything about humans, we know we're a profoundly social species. Our ability to collaborate is what allowed us to do all these amazing things we've done. If we could only work alone, none of the stuff around us would exist, right? So it was just this very kind of fresh perspective. And so now we've got this new kind of opportunity. It's like there's a whole bunch of new algorithms, but then like, what are the applications, right? So we started to think about, if you could design robots that could interact with people in this more humanistic way, what are the huge societal challenges we face where this is a unique technology that could really make a difference? And so you think about quality of education, right? So not every student can have a personal tutor, right? But if you could design that kind of tutor, you could potentially make the quality of education much higher and more equitable for everyone, right? So when you think about the scalability and the affordability, you can tell the same story for healthcare. Chronic disease is like this huge, costs our country in the United States here trillions of dollars. It's a huge challenge for people to be able to adapt their behavior to kind of do what's called behavior change. A lot of people have coaching and they work with doctors and so forth. But you can't have a doctor in your house every day. You're going to see your doctor maybe once every 3 months, but you could have a robot health coach with you every day to motivate you and help you do what you need to do, right? So this theme of extending our human professionals, our institutions to scalable, affordable, humanistic, humanized support every day becomes a game changer in many different areas. I can tell you the same story about aging, right? Being able to age in place. So when we look at a problem, we think about the opportunities. My framing has always been, it's a unique kind of technology that has a different psychology of engagement than any other technology. Where are the big bangs, so to speak, of the impact, where this could really be transformative for society writ large? So we start there. So we kind of look at, numbers in terms of unmet needs and challenges, and we talk to the care professionals. What challenges are they facing? We talk to people who would be the main users. What challenges are you facing? We read a ton of literature and understand the science of it all, right? So we're trying to get a full kind of 360 viewpoint of where is the real opportunity in terms of the innovation, and then the active co-design. So designing with our stakeholders, deploying with our stakeholders, getting feedback from that whole process, and iterating until we feel we have something that actually can make a real difference. So, that's just part of the process.
Oh, just to jump in for anybody who doesn't understand like what a stakeholder is, like, would you consider that like mainly your users, your like the people
Yeah,
who?
So a stakeholder is anyone who's going to be impacted by that technology that you're trying to bring about, right? So if you're thinking about something like, I want to develop a social robot, helpful companion for an older person who's trying to age in place. Who are all the stakeholders involved with that? So there's clearly the main user, the older person. It could be their family caregivers. It could be their clinical doctor or nurse. It could be their non-clinical care staff. It could be if they're in an assisted living facility, all the other people in the assisted living facility who may encounter this robot, in terms of their daily life and practice, right? So it's anyone who's going to potentially be touched or impacted or experience what you're creating. And so, you have, for things to actually make sense and be adopted, you have to kind of think about the much bigger picture about what's the system, what's the social technical or the human technical system upon which you're trying to introduce this new, potentially disruptive, but hopefully in a good way, technology. And then as you introduce it, how do you get those inputs and viewpoints so you can keep iterating and making sure that that technology is providing value to all of those stakeholders in some way that they're willing to adopt it. The risk is that you build something and nobody wants it, right? So the only way, or you build something that doesn't work because there's challenges you weren't even aware that you had to address, right? So the way you become aware of all of those subtleties and nuances is through engaging these people and deploying and having them try it out and giving you feedback and iterating and testing and doing this all along the cycle. So, I have 3 teenage boys, and I've been, in a very different domain, I've been trying to teach them that there's no such thing as good writing, only good rewriting. It's the same for design. There's no such thing as good design, only good redesign. And you just get it better and better and better until you have something that, people are like, okay, this really makes sense. I want to use it. It's having the outcomes you hope for. And then it's about scaling, right? So you start with a smaller group, and then you try to think about more diversity of users, and then you kind of scale it over time. So things happen in all these different time scales with all these different kinds of user groups.
When you talk about those different cycles of redesign and scaling, at what point do the ethical considerations come in? You're talking about social systems and social and emotional intelligence. Do you do that, before you begin your design when you're brainstorming, or towards the end when the robot's almost ready?
Yeah, so it's again, that's also throughout the entire process. So there are many ethical challenges and opportunities when you create any kind of new technology. And the thing that's both so fascinating and challenging about a technology like social robots is because you are designing for an experience and an engagement that is completely new. And right now, we're only familiar with kind of analogs in terms of relationships with people. And so there's a lot of concerns around things like emotional engagement and social bonds with machines versus people. And I mean, just a whole slew of concerns around that. And it's important to be fully like eyes wide open about these things. So, in terms of, so we call it responsible AI, and it comes in a lot of different ways, right? So one is around the data, right? How do you responsibly handle people's data that they feel their privacy and security is respected? Another is, well, what if these are learning machines? What if they're learning personalized policies and adapting? How can you make sure that what the robot's learning is actually providing benefit to people and isn't somehow mitigating or marginalizing the outcomes you want? Can you make sure that these technologies are providing benefit rather than doing unintended harm? When we talk about children, that's a very kind of particular topic that people are very concerned about. If children are interacting with robots day in and day out for a long period of time, how can we know that this is benefiting children versus causing some sort of, let's say, developmental consequence we didn't expect, right? When we think about the persuasiveness of these technologies, right? So, so much of social interaction, it's a two-way street. It's a negotiation. You're shaping each other's behaviors, your thoughts. I mean, this is what social interaction is. So for a robot health coach, you're trying to help people engage in a goal that they want to achieve, but you're essentially engaging in this process of behavior change. People are trying to change their behavior so they adopt healthier practices than they would otherwise. Well, so the robot is shaping their behavior, right? So you can do that to help people. That same technology could also be done to manipulate people, right? So again, a whole host of really important, deep ethical questions around this technology, tremendous opportunity for benefit, but needs to be done in a super responsible way. So, there's a number of ways you try to make sure that you're addressing kind of the responsible development of AI. So there are ethical design practices. So we've just created AI and ethics curriculum for middle school, which actually starts to teach kids, people like you, how do you design ethically? What are the tools and the frameworks to do that? And a lot of that gets down to, you need to identify who your stakeholders are, and you need to understand what they care about. What are their values? What are their goals? What are the things that matter to them? And you can create this matrix, and you can start to see that different stakeholders have different values and goals, and your design may not be able to satisfy everybody all the time, but you need to be mindful in terms of, I'm designing this technology solution for this particular kind of set of stakeholders and values, and just be very conscientious about that, right? So there are design practices you can engage in. You can bring in people who are the domain experts, from the boots on the ground people who work with those people every day, who can give you really practical feedback about what are the concerns from an ethical or social perspective you need to be aware of. You can bring in ethicists, you can bring in any range of experts to try to make sure that you have, again, eyes kind of wide open as you design these things, and start to come up with what are the ways we can monitor and assess along the way, that if we're noticing something is going in a direction we didn't intend, we can intervene and change, right? So your own ability to kind of keep yourselves honest, so to speak, about what's happening with that technology in the world is really important. So, there's new areas emerging, so you're starting to hear these terms like co-design, participatory design, design justice. These are all areas that are basically saying we can't just foist these technologies on people. It's like you need to really involve them in the design process, so you have a much better shot of doing something that actually really does provide benefit and is something that they, again, really do find value in, versus just saying, I've created something, it's awesome, go use it, right? So again, these are, with the discussion particularly on AI and the ethics of AI, there's a much more deeper appreciation of these, again, very human-centered design practices being brought to AI. And it's very early days of that. So when I give talks now, I kind of talk about, there's this whole world of design, human-centered design, and there's a whole world of AI. And right now they don't really talk to each other that much. And what we need is we need AI design. We need these two worlds to come together. That's starting to happen more and more, but I wouldn't say it's like what everybody understands yet. And some of this gets down to honestly how we educate and train, right? So when we're designing these AI curriculums, we bake in design and ethical design practices. So you were learning all about that as you learn about the technology. But when you look at how these subject matters are taught, certainly within the university level, they're not integrated. It's like you're doing all your engineering stuff and you're not necessarily taking any ethics classes or any of that other stuff. And if you do, maybe it's one lecture at the end of a class. It's like, we need to start to rethink, I think, how we educate and train the people who are going to be designed to be the future designers of these technologies. So you're not hoping someone else who's an expert in that will figure out the bugs or the problems. It's like you as the designer are conscientious about these things as you're designing it. And then you can also have other people look and review and, have kind of critiques about it as well. But better if the people designing the technologies also get those practices and those issues. So I think there's going to be important implications for how we educate and train.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that, something I'm hearing is just you may have a great idea, right? If you're one of our inventors who is working on solving a problem, and it may sound amazing to you, but definitely every step of the way you should be talking to people who are going to be using it, talking to people who may be impacted by it, to make sure that, you know, you can adjust your path early and often, right?
Early and often. I mean, it's just part of the process. And I would
Yeah.
also say, you know, when you talk about entrepreneurs, you know, often the best entrepreneurs are trying to create solutions for something that's deeply personal and meaningful. They've got a real deep kind of perspective on it just from their life experience. So don't underestimate your own perspective and experience as well. I wouldn't say just pay attention to everyone else and don't listen to yourself. Listen to yourself if this is a pain point that you see in your family or your friends or whatever. It's like you also have a completely valid perspective on it. You just also want to engage and think about the full 360, I think, of what you're trying to create. But often the best entrepreneurs, you know, they're doing something they have deep personal expertise and appreciation of.
Well, thanks for all those tips. This has been amazing. I think that we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that all of our problem solvers are inspired and yeah, start to think a little bit differently about their users.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
All right.
Cynthia. Take care. Bye.
Build great stuff that does good.